Certainly, we know these are unprecedented times, and talking about hosting successful virtual events seems a little bit different of a topic a month ago than it does today, in terms of the fact that most of us, if not all of us right now, are sitting in our home offices on a digital device. So I want to start by just offering you a quote. And of course, this quote is something that I think many of you are familiar with, but really seems to fit with what's going on in our world today, and also why we're talking specifically about hosting virtual events and how to do that successfully. Because in every crisis, I believe that there is opportunity. And if you are similar to most people that I've talked to, your initial reaction in this particular health and financial crisis that we're in was one of anxiety and fear and unknown. And one of the great things that you can do when you're feeling fear or anxiety is to think about what's in your control. And I know for myself as an entrepreneur, I thought, well, I am anxious about what's going on in the world, but here's an opportunity for me to share some expertise that I have in a different way than I've done in the past. And so when we think about what has happened since COVID-19 has been called to all of our awareness and affected us across the states and globally, is that so many of these live events that many of you were hosting or live meetings have been canceled or postponed. I know myself as a keynote speaker, within 2 days, I had 6 events canceled in March and April. And so, really looking at how we can adjust and how we can stay connected despite those cancellations. Social distancing certainly requires online learning, online meetings, and topics such as we're talking about today. And I think the opportunity or something that I would encourage you to rise to the challenge is there's real need to be creative and to be skilled online. And so this isn't about, making sure you're perfect online. If anything, what is really great about virtual learning is there is a way in which it can be a little bit more casual. For any of you who watch late night television, if you've watched Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert, to watch them from going, in these professional studios to basically having their wives and their kids film them and doing some creative things online to stay engaged in the audience. I mean, I think that they are really a model to in knowing that you don't have to be perfect with this. You just have to be sincere and do your best. And so it's a real opportunity for all of us to stay relevant and visible by embracing online technology and these virtual events. You may have been a little resistant in the past, or you may have thought, oh, I'll get to that. Well, we've all been thrown into doing this. And so my hope is that what you'll walk away with is some key learnings to help you not only at this time where we're all online, but also going forward. So when I thought about today and I thought, well, what do I want to teach the Bentley alumni and other special guests that I've invited to this call? And I want to talk about what are some of the common mistakes and how to avoid them. I certainly have made every one in the book. And so we'll look at what are the things that you want to try to avoid and how can you learn from mistakes in online presentations. We'll also talk about best practices for virtual events. And when I'm talking about best practices, one thing to keep in mind is I'm really going to focus in on the presentation, on the marketing, on the promotion, and the follow-up. I am not going to be talking about technical best practices other than some of the obvious ones because my expertise is not in that area. So while we're not focusing on the technical aspects or different platforms per se, certainly I do know folks that have that expertise that I could refer you to. So after this event, you can ping me and I can connect you to those professionals as well. We'll talk about how to interact with a digital audience, and I'll give you a little experience of that. And lastly, tips for leveraging the content beyond the event. One of the things that I learned early in my career, and I think digitally I do it even more than I do it at live events, is really you spend a lot of time putting this material together. So how can you make sure that you can leverage that content in a variety of different ways and make yourself have a great return on investment? So we will look at how you can turn one presentation into 6 or 7 pieces of content pretty quickly. So that's kind of exciting for anybody who's in marketing, entrepreneurship, or really kind of in charge of doing that. Emily gave me a nice introduction, so I don't really need to add on to that, other than I want to offer you this one anecdote that, or one line that someone said to me. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I work with a variety of financial firms and business companies, creating content, keynote speaking, doing all sorts of different types of education and writing. And after I got off doing a keynote presentation for this one particular institution, the person who hired me said, I think I like your webinars better than I like your keynote presentations. And I remember at the time, I was like, oh, that kind of hurts my ego. But later I realized maybe all that time talking to myself as a kid, being told that I was too verbal as a child, and all the practicing I do by myself, which inevitably is talking to myself to get ready for a keynote, has paid off. So that's why I feel like I have some special insights into this topic, given my experience over the past couple of years, and apparently my great ability to give a good webinar and to talk to myself in an entertaining manner. So I don't know about you, but if you're going from a live to a virtual event, it's somewhat of an adjustment. But there's pros and cons to both the live event, the in-person event, and the virtual event. So I want to start, before we get into some of the tactics, talking about what are the pros and cons. So when it comes to live events, right, face-to-face, I know right now, a lot of people yearning for connection. I don't know if you've done this yet, but I highly encourage people video conferencing and having happy hours using Zoom or Skype or whatever platform you might use, because we're yearning for that connection. But a live event really gives you that. It also gives you an opportunity to really wow people and network in person. It's something that many of us, especially if we are Gen Xers or boomers, are really comfortable in doing, and a little less comfortable than we are with virtual. Now there's geographic limitations. When just having all of you sign in the chat and telling me where you're from, there's many, many states represented. So there's no limitations like there are with live events. And live events are very labor intensive, and you can do a lot of work, spend a lot of money, and end up having low attendance. So when you think about virtual events and you think about the pros and cons, one of the things I love is the convenience. All of us are in our houses or our home offices. It's cost effective. The platform for many of us is free. For others, it's a very low business cost. There is a huge geographic reach globally, and it's a great way to build community. I think one of the things we need to be thinking about more is, how do we build community at a time where we're socially distancing and not able to connect in the traditional ways in which we've connected. Now, cons. We could say technology. You never know what's going to happen. So I always have a plan B, a plan C when I'm doing a webinar. And I have even had a situation where my computer has died completely, and I have carried on the webinar and finished, and nobody knew. Technology can be a con. It can make us very anxious, but I think when you embrace it and embrace the fact that, you know what, you can't always control what's going to happen, it all becomes somewhat okay. The last two cons are interesting. So one is the attention deficit that many, many of us have when we're online. Now, I'm not calling anybody out because I can't see anybody, but my guess is some of you are multitasking. Some of you are doing a couple of different things at the same time, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is a challenge in keeping people engaged. And I know for myself, online learning is a little bit harder for me because I can drink wine, fold laundry, do a variety of things while I'm listening to somebody or watching somebody on a video. And the last con, and it's not for everybody, is that for many people, this is a new skill. And given the fact that we've all been asked to, most of us have been asked to stay home and work, and we have to work remotely, it may be a new skill that maybe you didn't want to learn, but here you are. So there are many, many pros to the virtual events and some cons that we're going to help you overcome today. So if someone has their chat box up, they can let me know if anybody recognizes this picture of and what movie this guy is from. But basically what we're going to be talking about on this slide is we're going to be talking about 3 common mistakes that I see presenters make. Yes, it's Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the movie. And this was the teacher who taught voodoo economics, and he was a really, really boring teacher. So anybody who is in the same generation as me is probably like, cool. I know Kathleen and Annika both knew that. And for others, they have either seen it in reruns or don't know at all what I'm talking about. But basically, the idea is we don't want to be this teacher that's repetitive, that's boring, that nobody's paying attention to. And so what are the things that we can be thinking about in order to not do that? One is monopolizing the time. Now, trust me, there will be a time where we will interact a little bit more later on this particular webinar. But I call this the expert syndrome. Many of us, in whatever field we're in, get caught up in, if I am going to speak to an audience, if I'm going to give a virtual event, I need to show that I have this expertise, that I'm confident, and you end up doing more talking at people than interacting with people. And it becomes a little bit easier to do that when it's digitally, because right now, as I'm sitting here, I see my screen, I see my face in my video, and I don't have access to everybody else. And so what we need to keep in mind is that it's very important to take off your expert hat. Yes, you want to have some expertise, but take off your expert hat and really connect with people and find out what they want to learn. Part of what we did was ask those questions up front of, are there particular things you want to learn in this particular seminar? You also don't want to overschedule your time. So in other words, if you think you are going to present for 45 minutes, don't have an hour and 15 minutes worth of content. Really shave it down. And I think this becomes easier. It is something that I continue to struggle with, not in terms of monopolizing the time, but just wanting to share so much content and realizing that only so much can be done. So again, take off the expert hat. Don't focus solely on you. Focus on your audience and leave some time for people to engage. Which comes to the second mistake that I see people making, focusing too much on themselves and not enough on the audience. One of the things you need to be asking yourself if you are going to be hosting a virtual event or a meeting is not only what you might want to teach or what you might want to communicate, but you also want to be looking at, what does my audience want to learn? Because I could be sitting here saying, well, I really want to teach you about X, Y, and Z, and somebody else says, but I want to learn about ABC. And so it's really taking some time to think about the education that you're offering, thinking about stories that aren't just about yourself, but they're about other people, that broaden out the audience, and really thinking about, how can I focus on who is out there and the different industries. And so, you know, one of the things that I saw in the chat is a lot of you are from very different industries. I saw telecom, human resource professionals, alumni association, entrepreneurs. And so really making sure there's time for us to interact and get those questions and answers answered. So I'm focusing on we and all of our learning, just not on what I want to share with the audience. And lastly, and this is true with any particular event, but don't evaluate your success on one instance. You really want to make sure, if you are doing virtual events, especially if you're doing a virtual event for marketing, selling a product, getting your brand identity out there, connecting with your employees, connecting with your clients, you don't want to, you don't want to say, oh, I did one event and it didn't work. Consistency is very important online. Whether it is, I'm going to publish a blog, you're going to publish it every week, every other week, it's going to be on the same day at the same time. That consistency allows your digital audience to find you. Same thing with workshops. Really looking at, what can I offer today? How can this be part of my overall strategic plan? And how do I build up my audience over time? So when I started workshops and online presentations, I'll fess up. The first time I did this years ago, I had 3 people show up for something that I marketed the bejeebies out of. And I could have given up, said, oh, I'm not made for this. This isn't good. But what over time, what has happened is now I have something coming up next week and I have 100 people registered already. And so it's that consistency and evaluating your success. If you think about it, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's really being in it for the long run. So those are common mistakes. I think, you know, we all make them, and it's just being aware and trying not to do that. What I will do next, before we do the interactive piece, is talk a little bit about what I see as some best practices. Now, when I'm thinking about this for folks, I'm thinking a lot about virtual events that may be educational events, marketing opportunities, opportunities to communicate with your clients or your employees during this time of crisis and beyond. So some of these are going to be more about education than meetings. And if people have questions about meetings at the end of the presentation today, we can certainly talk about that. So you want to cater to a niche. You don't want to be everything to everybody. It is a common mistake that we do. A lot of professionals do say, well, if I have a general audience and I cater to them, then I'm going to have more people attend. Ironically, you have less people attend. So you want to think about, what is my niche? Today, it's Bentley alumni. What might it be week for you and your audience? Am I catering to women, entrepreneurs, professionals, healthcare workers, employees? All of that is going to make a difference. You really want to think about the contents through that lens. And think about it. Do you remember, once again, I think I'm aging myself, but do you remember when McDonald's actually had a lobster salad sandwich on the menu? Well, if you do, you know it was probably a couple of months. And if you don't, that's because it didn't work. Because McDonald's niche is hamburgers. It's not lobster salad. So it's keeping in mind to not try to be all to all people, and to really think about, what am I good at? How do I make sure that I can cater to that particular niche? Next, you want to be education focused. We are no longer in a transactional society in terms of sales. It's all relationship selling. It's also relationship connecting. And I think the best webinars or virtual events that I've attended, and I've attended a lot of different ones, and let me know if you disagree, but a lot of times they're education focused. It's not about promoting yourself. It's not about promoting your company. It's about teaching and sharing and learning. And so when you stay with that educational component, you're really developing a relationship with your audience. You're showing them how you can be of service to them, and it ultimately is much more effective than a hard sell or really just focusing in on your firm or particular product. With promotion, you got to promote early and often. Another big mistake that I see a lot of the business professionals I work with make is that they don't spend the time that they need to get the message out that they're having a particular event. In normal times, it takes about 7 touches. So 7 times people see you online, on social, through an email, in order to actually click through just to find out more about the event. 7 times. So I would say allow 2 months of promotion. Now you may be sitting there saying, well, I don't have 2 months with what's going on currently. So it is a little bit different in this window of time where the promotion windows are shorter, everybody's online, so people are looking to fill up their day with this type of content. But in general, in normal situations, you want to think about how you can be strategic, how you can promote it early and often. And the nuance, right? You got to walk that line between being bothersome and you have an email in somebody's email box every day, and just gently nudging people. I try to, like, for instance, when I'm doing a webinar, I try to do 4 to 7 touches by email, depending on how far out it is, and also having it in different types of social media. Bentley alumni, I think, does a great job of promoting. So think about how often they touch their particular audience members and remind you of what's happening. And so you want to let people know what's in it for them, what's the benefit for them, and promoting early and often. You want to use social media. Now, I say that, and many of you might be giggling, like, of course we're going to use social media. Depending on the industry you're in, there are some industries, such as banking and financial services, where I do a lot of work, where social media is something that is restricted or something that people are reluctant to engage in. And, you know, given the fact that we are running a digital event with a digital audience, and you're going to get people who are comfortable in that realm, you're going to want to use social media. It is your friend. But also think about, again, who is your niche? You can waste a lot of time promoting things on social media in an ineffective way. Or you can think about, okay, so I have a group of professionals and I want to get my message out to those professionals in a particular industry. Maybe that's a LinkedIn promotion. Or you may say, hey, you know, I have a craft project and I want to teach people about this craft project and I want to have some fun. And I know a lot of young people hang out on Instagram and I want to show pictures of that. So then you pick Instagram. I tend to think about who is the target audience, where do they hang out on social, and how can I be strategic about it? And when I say strategic, there's the pre-promotion, the day of promotion. Today, I think we're on Facebook Live. Sometimes people will have live tweets during their event, which gathers other people. When I've participated in things like that, it's been very successful. And then there's the follow-up promotion of, hey, thanks, you're a great audience. Here's more information about me, my firm, or here's how you can follow up. So really engage social media, but do so in a very strategic way because it can zap your energy. What do I mean by free is for me? Almost every virtual event nowadays has some sort of free offering. This one does this too. I'm going to offer you a free tip sheet and an opportunity to win a consultation around help marketing or thinking about your next virtual event. Free is something that's really expected, and it's also a great way to keep the learning going. So later I'll share a tip sheet with you and how you can access it, but it's think about with your firm, how can I brand it? How can I make it something that's very user-friendly, like one piece of paper or one ebook or something small, something really useful. And then how can I provide it to my audience in a way that not only is helpful for them, so easily accessible, but also allows me to gather information if need be on who's attended. So it really serves a purpose. It's something that pretty much is expected. You can use in your promotion. It often entices people to come live or to get the recording later. And the last thing I would say is to follow up softly. Now, it may vary industry to industry, but you're going to want to follow up, whether it is a virtual event, whether it's a meeting, whether it's, you know, an opportunity for future learning. You're going to want to think about what's the follow-up. That's part of your overall strategy. And so for Bentley alumni, they have a strategy because they have a consistent program and they'll follow up with you in a consistent way. Emily said it at the beginning. For a lot of other events, you want to think about how can I follow up in a way that's not a hard sell, that's really, once again, of being service, of offering an opportunity, and to being okay with who decides to engage you and who doesn't. And the reason I say softly, a lot of times I work with firms around being female friendly and gender savvy and reaching out to millennials and the next generation. And I think that hard sell no longer works. It's usually a turnoff. So and you have to think about authentically, what's that follow-up going to be for you and your firm or your event, and just make it something that's really useful, that's really simple, but is in service as opposed to buy this. Now, there may be some people who have made multi-million dollars that would disagree with me, but I do believe that that's a good approach for most organizations. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath because I told you at the beginning not to monopolize the time. So I'm going to practice what I preach. So in some of the questions that led up to this particular event, some of them really focused in on how can I be interactive? How can I engage the audience? So I'm going to give you 3 different ways to do that. And then we're going to have an experience of actually engaging together to see how that fits for you. So the first way is through polls, surveys, and chat rooms, right? So many of these platforms, and I've presented on many of them have an ability to do a poll which is at the beginning or in the middle or towards the end of the particular presentation, you can ask for people's feedback. They click a button and an instant poll comes up, or a very similar survey function. Those can be really interesting, especially when you're trying to get the pulse of the audience really quickly. And so I encourage you to check out those polls in those surveys and use them in your webinars or in your virtual events to connect with people. I know for me, I like to do a group discussion or a chat discussion. Seeing your names pop up here, asking about Ferris Bueller's Day Off, mentioning people's name, engaging that way can be really useful. Sometimes with group discussions, you'll have it a smaller group and you'll be able to do an audio discussion. I do that a lot, especially when I'm teaching at, say, Bentley University or some smaller group. Today we'll have our group discussion on chat and I'll show you how that works. And certainly you always want to have questions and answers. Sometimes we save them to the end. Often what I'll do during a presentation is I'll take them a couple of times throughout the presentation to kind of wake people up, get people re-engaged. So there are a variety of ways that you can interact. You can use technology, or you can go pretty simple, which is what we're going to do with this next piece. So depending on where you are, I want you to either, I'm a Gen Xer and I like paper, so you can take out a piece of paper and a pen, or you can write these things down on your tablet, or you can answer them in your head. But what I'm going to do is going to help you identify what I call your virtual training mindset. So what are your automatic thoughts and feelings about a virtual meeting or a virtual event? And so I want you to make this fit for you. So whatever the event is that's coming up, or the meeting that you want to plan, or the dilemma that you're having around virtual events that said, I'm going to show up to this webinar and find out more about this, picture that as you answer these questions. So in a minute, I am going to read off 5 statements pretty quickly, and I'm going to have you, to yourself, write down your automatic response to these statements. It's going to go pretty quick because it is an automatic thought and feeling. So if you spent too much time on it, it no longer would tap into those automatic thoughts and beliefs. And keep in mind, just answer whatever pops into your head first. Don't judge yourself. Be compassionate with yourself, but you're going to get the most out of this exercise by just jotting down the answers that come to your head, whether they're politically correct or not. Okay, so hopefully you have your pens and papers or your tablets or your thinking caps on. So just very quickly, whatever comes to mind, how would you end this statement? Live events are. Live events are. Virtual events are. Virtual events are. Online audiences are. Online audiences are. My biggest fear presenting online is. My biggest fear presenting online is. And lastly, my biggest strength, because we all have them, my biggest strength presenting online is. My biggest strength presenting online is. So just very quickly, kind of review your automatic responses. I know that went very quick, but it's helpful if you do that. You can go back and ponder it later. But when you're assessing your virtual mindset, I want you to think about how might my mindset, which we did a quick kind of litmus test for what your automatic thoughts and beliefs are about these online events, how is that mindset going to impact my events? and most importantly, what is one strength I have in this particular realm? And what is one challenge or one roadblock? We all have strengths in virtual presentations, and we all have potential challenges or roadblocks. And so what I'd like to do, or ask you to do, is type in to the chat box. Remember to do all panelists and attendees. And if you're willing, you're not required to do this, type in kind of what is one strength you have in virtual presentations and what's one challenge. And then we'll have a little bit of a chat/discussion about it. So what's one strength and what's one challenge? Positive is talking. Challenge is a little practice at doing it. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. I'm good at navigating the tools like WebEx. So Vicky, that's a strength. Hi, Vicky. It's nice that you joined us. Other strengths or challenges? I am concise and direct, Pam says, but hard to get others to talk. True, that can be a challenge. Gretchen, that she's very good at preparing, and that's a strength. Linda has great presentation skills, not as well versed in the tools. Cameron is confident, but challenged with the technology. Getting attendees engaged, somebody else just said again, is something that is a challenge. Strength, not being in person. Challenge, technical failure. A lot of us are anxious about the technology because it is the part that's out of our control. Strength, can ad-lib when necessary. Technical issues. And once again, another one with challenge in the technical department. I think the challenge around technology, as a side note for all of us, is that it is out of our control. So even when you're incredibly technical, you have technical confidence, it still can mess up. But if you think about it in terms of, that can also happen in a live presentation, that you can be mid-sentence. I've had a presentation, I flew all the way to South Africa, and the slides behind me had a mind of their own, and they took off. So the technology wasn't with me. So again, it tends to be a common fear and tends to be something that we can overcome in the moment with our improvisational skills. So great, thank you for doing that. I mean, I think that is one way. We didn't get to hear people's audio, but it's a way and a demonstration of how we can interact a little bit. And so really looking at, through chat, how can you call out people? How can you engage with them? And how can you get people involved in learning? And so while we're finishing this last piece, because I'm going to open it up for Q&A pretty shortly, I would love to have people start to ask the questions that they want to ask for clarification, and just anything that you'd want to know that we haven't covered so far, or maybe you'd want an example of, or something a little bit deeper. And we'll try to kind of continue this engagement as we move to the next piece. But I do want to thank everybody for taking the time to type in their strength and their challenge, and to really think about how you can capitalize on that strength and how you can overcome that challenge or embrace it. Yes, Emily, you popped back.
I'm back for our discussion. So if people want to complete any questions in the question and answer box, or if they want to just type them into the chat box, they're welcome to do that. But we do have some questions from our audience beforehand. One question that I don't know that you fully addressed in your talk was from Courtney Lombardo from the class of 2003, and she asks, what are some great ways to continually engage participants after your presentations or after your virtual events?
Emily, I feel like I couldn't have teed that up better.
Good.
For the next two slides, I'm going to talk about how you can kind of keep people engaged and what you can do to repurpose the content. So I'm going to go over that while I'm answering that question, because I think that really fits. If you just bear with me, Emily, for a second, because I think that will help. It was Christine, right? It was.
Yes.
I knew it was 2003. Okay. So one of the things that you can do to keep people engaged is to take the content that you have and repurpose it as much as possible. So obviously with repurposing, it saves you time. It helps you reach more people because there's people that aren't going to be on your event that could benefit from some of the materials from the event. It also helps you send a consistent message. So you want to keep sending the same message to increase your brand awareness, to show your expertise, and to be of service to other people. And so when you're leveraging your content, one of the things that's really great is you can have one event like today, or like whatever event you're throwing next, and you can turn that into at least 6 pieces of content pretty quickly. Now, I have a virtual team of assistants that help me do this and help me look good on social and repurposing things. You can do this yourself. You can also have your team work with you and do this. So some of them are going to be obvious. Maybe some of them you hadn't thought about. So you could do an email blast. You could even, having attended this event, do an email blast out to your team or out to your firm and say, hey, just attended this webinar by Bentley alumni hosted by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury. Here's the top 3 things I learned in this webinar. So all of a sudden you have content that you can go out to your audience or your participants with that reinforces or is teaching something that you learned. So that's number 1. 2, you can turn it into an article. What you can do with many of these platforms is you can automatically record them and then get a transcript of what you said. Now, a lot of people will take that transcript, edit it, and they'll all of a sudden have an article that they either can put on their website, they can share with their clients, their staff, or they can actually pitch it to a media source. So the second is an article. Similarly, you can have a blog post. So I'll give you an example. I did an interview a couple days ago, and I was asked about the uncertainty in our financial markets because my area of expertise is well psychology, and I talked about 2 or 3 things we could do to help with our financial anxiety. There was a video, there was an interview. I just took it and basically as is, threw it up on my blog, and I had a blog post out of it. You can go take a look at it if you want. But it's an easy, great way to then repurpose that content and to get that message back out. You can turn it into a handout. What were the top 5 things that you wanted people to walk away with? What's the call to action? A 1-page handout, 2 maybe tops, but really keeping it simple. It's another way to repurpose that content and to follow up with your audience. Social media posts. Again, if you have a transcript, you can have people take quotes out of what you said. You can take quotes about what people said on the workshop if they give you permission. There are maybe sometimes stats that are shared. We didn't share stats today, but you can socialize those. And you also can create video content. Now, I could take this video that's being made of me and post it. I know that the alumni does that, so they automatically have video content. Or it could be during your particular event, you decide, hey, I'm gonna ask 3 or 4 people that attended to give me a little video clip. You clip those together, you put it out, and again, it's reinforcing your message and it's additional content. There are so many more things you can do, and there's so many platforms that help you with transcripts, with videos, with doing these different types of repurposing. And that, I think, is a great way to follow up. So it's following up, continuing the education, continuing the brand recognition, continuing the message if it's a meeting with your employees, and continuing to kind of drip this information on them. So, you know, I'm sure there might be somebody in the audience that has other thoughts about how to repurpose and leverage content and follow up, but those tend to be kind of the things that I focus in on, how to turn one event into 6 pieces of content. And if you're in marketing or own your own company or are responsible for that, it's a big sigh of relief that you can do that quickly. The last thing before I open it back up, while I'm answering Q&A, I just want to let you know that I have some best practices for hosting virtual events handout, speaking of getting the message out and following the practice of free is for me. All you need to do is text my initials, KBK, to 33777. It will pop up in your text to put in your email. You then put in your email, and you will, a few minutes later, get emailed, and you have an opportunity to download this particular tip sheet. you will be put into my system. I give you permission to unsubscribe immediately. Definitely get the tip sheet. And I would love for you to stay subscribed, but if for some reason it's not useful for you, I totally understand. We're all inundated by a lot of these things. So those are different ways, Christine and others, that you can follow up and you can repurpose content and get that message out there. So I'm going to welcome Emily back for more Q&A.
All right, we have a couple questions already here, and we still have some from submitted earlier. Thank you, Kathleen, for your talk. And again, just as a reminder to everyone that we will have this recording available for you after today. First question comes from Eric Rowe. Hi, Eric. For alumni events, is it better to have some educational focus to your virtual events, or could fun events work as well, such as a trivia night? What do you think, Kathleen?
Ooh, I love that. So I actually think a mix is really good. And part of the reason today I focus more on the educational events is it's kind of the world in which I live. But since this crisis has hit, and I know that Bentley's doing some cool stuff as well, is, you know, there have been virtual wine events, Pilates virtually, yoga, trivia night I haven't heard, that's kind of fun. I actually have a young person in my life who's dating long distance, and she watched movies with her partner through chat. So there's a variety of things. I think the mix, if it fits for your niche, between fun, entertaining, and educational, it is a nice blend if that fits with your particular industry.
I agree. The next question comes from Gretchen Bingle, and she asks, besides planned interaction during the presentation, how do you check in with the audience and make sure they're staying engaged?
Interesting. So depending on what platform you're on, you can have them chat like we did today. There are some platforms that actually show when people are listening. And if they are actually, there's actually a measure as to whether they're watching you on the screen or whether they have another screen up. So you can watch their participation go down, and that's when you reach out, you ask a question, you get engaged, you throw in a poll. So I think there's a lot of ways to shake it up and to, as your skills get better, to monitor that type of engagement. What I try to do is always have a point where I'm checking in with people. Depending on what platform I'm using and who I'm presenting for, and sometimes doing that a couple of times throughout the presentation. I think that's the best you can do. And then you kind of measure that performance and see how you can tweak it as time goes on. Make sense, Gretchen? Hopefully it does.
All right, our next question comes from Kathleen, who typed her question into the chat box. What suggested platforms do you recommend, as we are needing to provide CME for our attendees? And I'm not sure I know what CME is, so Kathleen, perhaps you know.
Continuing education credits?
That's my guess, something around that.
Something on your chat?
Yeah, medical credits, there we go.
So my guess is that with medical credits, just like any continuing education credits, you have to monitor how long people are online. And a lot of the platforms have that ability at the higher level. So while I can't tell you exactly which ones have it, because that isn't really my area of expertise, I can tell you that you can get a report, usually, and most platforms do this, of how long somebody's been engaged and online and dialed in. Of course, there's always people who can dial in and then go do something else, and so it looks like they've been on, but you know, hopefully doctors and other professionals will be ethical enough not to do that. So often that report can be accessed in a variety of these different digital mediums. And I've used WebEx with companies that have done that. I've used Skype for companies that have done that. And I actually think Zoom has something like that, but I can't say 100%. But any of those customer service reps will be quick to tell you which ones have that ability and what that might cost.
And we're using Zoom today, as you all know, and that is a platform that definitely does tell you how long a person is on your virtual event for. So,
yeah,
if that's
no, it's a great question. It is something to be aware of. Yep.
Another question that came from our registration is, and you did talk about this to some extent, but perhaps you have some additional tips on what are some tactics for generating attendance?
Oh, okay. So for getting people to want to show up, I think it's thinking a little bit, like I said before, about what's going to be useful to your audience, what's a pain point that they have, or something that they're really anxious about or really want information about. I think in addition to just being strategic in that way, it's also offering them something for showing up. So for instance, if you show up live to an event and you attend this virtual event, you'll be able to win a free book, or you'll be able to win a chance to kind of have a consultation, which is what we're doing today. If you don't attend live, you won't be able to have that benefit. So it's often enticing people to sign up to get something in addition to the learning. And then if they show up live, they get something else. There's experts that do all sorts of sales funnels and things around this, but at its simplest, that's typically what you do. So a really good topic, something that's free for showing up for attending by a certain time and attending live, and then some follow-up as well. And it's trial and error. Some things you think, oh, this is brilliant, and you don't have many people show up, and sometimes you've hit it. So those are the things that I would try.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Kim Walters. What tools do you recommend for polls when you're doing a webinar?
Usually the tools are built into the platform. Zoom, I think, is so simple, but I would imagine that they have the tools. I know with a WebEx, and I've been on so many of them, I can't even tell you all the names because I get hired to speak, so I use their platforms. But often those polls are there, and so it's simple questions like today we asked about the industry, or you could say, what's your biggest fear around virtual events, and people answer it, and the poll comes up. So they're pretty simple. They can be add-ons, but I'd look for a platform that has it in that. And if it's a professional level platform, chances are, the free membership, you won't get it, but if you go up one to the page, you usually get these types of things.
We did have the option of using our polling feature today if we wanted to, so we can play around with that the next time.
I wish I had known that.
I know. Well, see, here I am learning things too.
Excellent.
All right. Well, that's all for our questions today. Thank you so much, Kathleen. We certainly learned a lot. I know I did. And we'll be sharing with everyone any additional, all of our follow-ups. So definitely keep an eye on your inboxes.